What if a spoonful of honey could repair your DNA? Welcome to Organic Science, a segment created by the Organic Guy with the help of AI that highlights amazing research often ignored in the realm of organic and sustainable farming. Today we're diving into brand new findings on organic honey's superpowers, how its antioxidant polyphenols activate your cell's DNA repair system and reverse damage from pesticides like glyphosate and chlorpyrifos. Let's get started. This sounds almost like science fiction, maybe a little too good to be true. So what exactly did this research uncover?
It really does have that feel, doesn't it? But yeah, this study, it was published in Molecular Nutrition and Food Research, and it really digs into the potential of organic honey to, well, do just that.
Yeah.
They looked at how it might fight back against the harmful effects of these pretty common pesticides,
Right.
looking right down at the cellular level, and even in people who've been exposed long term.
Okay, let's back up a bit then. Why is this even a worry? What's the actual problem with pesticides like glyphosate and chlorpyrifos that, our listeners should be aware of?
Well, the research focuses on glyphosate. That's GLY, the main thing in lots of weed killers and chlorpyrifos or CPF, which is a very common insecticide. And there's evidence linking them to potential DNA damage. In some cases, there are concerns about cancer risks for people who are exposed.
Okay, DNA damage. How do they think that happens? What's the mechanism they're proposing?
The researchers suggest one possibility involves the mitochondria. These are the tiny power generators inside our cells.
Ah, yes, the classic powerhouse of the cell.
Exactly. And the idea is that these pesticides might mess with how mitochondria work.
Okay, so the power plants get disrupted. What happens then?
Well, when they're not running properly, it can cause a buildup of these things called reactive oxygen and nitrogen species, RSN for short.
RSN. Sounds a bit aggressive.
You could think of them like tiny, unstable molecules bouncing around, causing trouble. They can damage parts of the cell, including, importantly, the DNA. And the study suggests this process can happen in people exposed to these pesticides.
That does paint a concerning picture. But this is where honey might step in. Its protective power.
Precisely. The research zeroed in on organic honey, and they made a point of noting it's packed with these compounds called polyphenols.
Polyphenols, right. We hear about those a lot with antioxidants.
Yeah, they're natural compounds from plants, and they are known for their antioxidant abilities, basically, neutralizing those damaging Rosen molecules we just mentioned. But this study wanted to see if honey's polyphenols could do more, like maybe directly help out the mitochondria themselves.
Ah, okay. So not just cleaning up the mess, but maybe stopping the mess from being made in the first place
Yeah,
by helping the mitochondria stay healthy.
that's the really interesting angle they explored, yes. Could honey help stabilize the mitochondria and cut down on the creation of those harmful Rosen?
So how did they test this? What did the actual experiments look like?
They started in vitro, which just means in the lab, using cells in dishes. They got extracts from 4 different kinds of organic honey acacia, chestnut, orange tree, and woodland. And they tested these extracts on 2 types of human cells, bronchial epithelial cells.
Okay, representing the airways like breathing exposure.
Exactly. And also neuronal cells, so thinking about potential effects on the nervous system.
Makes sense. So what happened when they put the honey extracts and the pesticides together with these cells?
Well, first off, what's fascinating is that the honeys weren't all the same. They had different mixes of polyphenols, different profiles, and because of that, they had different levels of antioxidant strength. The woodland honey, which they called X4, really stood out.
Stood out how?
It had the highest amount of polyphenols overall and the strongest antioxidant activity in their tests. It was particularly rich in things like caffeic acid, ferulic acid, pinobanxin, several specific compounds.
Right away, the type of organic honey seems important.
It definitely looks that way based on this study, yes.
Okay, so different honeys, different strengths. What did they see happening with the mitochondria in those raw SN molecules when honey was involved?
They saw that the pesticides did cause problems for the mitochondria. At low doses, activity went up, but at higher doses, it went down, it was disruptive, and pesticide exposure increased those raw SN levels in both cell types.
Right, the expected damage.
But here's the key part. Adding the honey extracts actually helped reverse that mitochondrial destabilization. It seemed to help them function more normally. And crucially, the honey extracts significantly lowered the amount of those damaging raw SN molecules.
Wow, okay, so the honey is helping the cells power plants and reducing the harmful byproducts. Did that translate into less DNA damage?
It absolutely did. The researchers measured DNA damage directly, things like single-strand breaks and specific types of oxidized bits in the DNA called FPG sites and endo-I sites, and they found that the honey extracts significantly inhibited the damage caused by the pesticides.
So there's a clear link. Less ROS and less DNA damage.
It strongly suggests that yes, the honey acts like a shield, partly by reducing that oxidative stress. So, in the lab at least, certain honeys, particularly that woodland one, seem to protect cells at a really fundamental level.
That's already impressive acting as a shield. But you mentioned repair earlier. Did the honey actually help the cells fix damage that had already occurred?
Yes, and this is maybe even more exciting. They found that the honey extracts, just on their own, actually increase the cell's DNA repair activity, especially in those bronchial cells.
Just the honey itself boosted repair.
It seems so. They even did a test where they damaged the cells with hydrogen peroxide, and the cells pre-treated with honey were better at fixing that damage. And perhaps most importantly, when they exposed cells to pesticides, which reduce their repairability, adding the honey extracts helped reverse that suppression. It brought the repair activity back up.
That is genuinely remarkable. It's not just preventing the fire, it's helping the fire department work better too.
That's a great way to put it. It seems to work on both ends, protection and repair.
The study also mentioned a couple of specific players, NRF2 and OGG1. Can you break those down for us? What's their role here?
Sure, so NRF2 is kind of like a master switch or a regulator inside the cell for dealing with stress, particularly oxidative stress. It can turn on a whole suite of protective genes.
Like a cellular defense coordinator.
Sort of, yeah. And OGG1 is one of the important repair crew enzymes. Its specific job is to find and remove a common type of oxidative damage to DNA called oxidized guanine. NRF2 is known to influence OGG1 activity.
Okay, so NRF2 is the alarm. OGG1 is part of the repair team. What did the pesticides in honey do to them?
Interestingly, they found that pesticide exposure actually caused more NRF2 and OGG1 to move into the cell nucleus, which is where they need to be to function.
Wait, the pesticides increase these protective repair proteins. That seems counterintuitive.
It does a bit, doesn't it? It might be the cell trying to respond to the stress caused by the pesticides. But here's the twist. The honey extracts, especially that potent woodland honey, further enhance this movement of NRF2 and OGG1 into the nucleus.
So both pesticides and honey trigger this response, but the honey does it more.
It appears so, but remember, even though both seem to increase the presence of these proteins in the nucleus?
The actual increase in DNA repair activity was mainly linked to the honey treatment, right?
Exactly. That's the key distinction. It suggests that just having more NRF2 or OGG1, there isn't the whole story. The honey seems to be doing something extra, perhaps influencing how well those proteins actually work once they're there, maybe some post-transcriptional regulation, as the researchers termed it.
Fascinating. So we've seen what honey can do in a dish, but that's not the same as inside a person. Did they look at this in people?
They did, and this is where it gets really compelling. They moved to an in vivo study, meaning they worked with living people. They recruited residents from an area in Italy, the Val di Non, which is known for intensive apple farming.
Okay, so likely exposed to agricultural chemicals regularly.
That was the idea. This area uses various pesticides, fungicides, herbicides like glyphosate, insecticides like chlorpyrifos, ethyl. So these people had chronic real-world exposure. They compared them to a control group from an area without that kind of pesticide use.
And they confirmed the exposure? They checked for pesticides?
Yes, they measured urine samples for a metabolite, a breakdown product of chlorpyrifos called TCP. They found it consistently in the exposed group's urine. The levels were highest during May and June, which lined up with the peak pesticide application times. They also checked air samples in the area and confirmed multiple pesticides were present.
So undeniable chronic exposure for this group. What did they find regarding their DNA and repair abilities before any honey intervention?
Compared to the controls living in the pesticide-free area, this exposed group showed significantly reduced DNA repair activity. Their bodies were also slower at fixing DNA damage when it occurred.
Even when pesticides weren't being actively sprayed?
Yes, even during periods of lower spraying. What was also interesting was that their overall levels of DNA damage, those FPG and endo-I sites, were actually similar to the control group during these times.
So similar damage, but less repairability. That suggests the damage might be accumulating more over time, or the system is just struggling to keep up.
That's a reasonable interpretation, yes. It points to a potential long-term burden on the DNA repair system from chronic, even low-level exposure. It's quite sobering, really.
It really is. Okay, so then came the honey. What happened when these exposed individuals started eating it?
This is the core finding from the human part of the study. For 2 weeks, the residents in the exposed group ate 50 grams, about maybe 3 tablespoons of that specific woodland organic honey each day. And the results were quite striking. The honey supplementation significantly boosted their DNA repair activity.
Boosted it even while they were still being exposed.
Yes, they measured it during both low and high exposure periods within that time frame and saw improvement in both. And this improved repair capability led directly to a measurable reduction in the accumulated oxidized DNA damage. Those FPG and endoephocytes went down.
Wow. So a fairly simple dietary change made a tangible difference in people dealing with ongoing, real-world pesticide exposure. That's powerful.
It really is. It suggests that diet could play a meaningful role in mitigating some of these environmental exposures.
Did they confirm the honey polyphenols were actually getting into the system?
They did. They checked total polyphenol levels in the urine samples and saw a significant increase after the honey supplementation started. So the beneficial compounds were being ingested, absorbed, and were likely contributing to the effects seen.
Okay, this has been a fantastic journey through the research. Let's try and boil it down.
Hmm.
What are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Right. Well, first, I'd say this study gives us some solid evidence that organic honey, particularly polyphenol-rich types like the woodland honey tested here, shows real potential to protect our DNA from damage caused by common pesticides like glyphosate and chlorpyrifos.
And critically, this wasn't just in lab cells, but also observed in people with chronic exposure.
Exactly. That real-world aspect is key. Second, the protection seems to be coming from multiple angles. It's not just antioxidants cleaning up ROSN, it also seems to involve supporting mitochondrial health and, crucially, actively enhancing the body's own DNA repair mechanisms.
And we learned that the type of honey could make a difference, right? With woodland honey showing particular promise in this specific study due to its high polyphenol content.
Yes, that was a clear finding here. The specific mix of compounds matters. Different honeys might have different strengths.
So for someone listening who might be worried about pesticides in their environment or food, what's the sort of bottom line message?
I think this study suggests that even ongoing, maybe low-level pesticide exposure could potentially wear down our DNA repair systems over time. And it presents organic honey, rich in these beneficial polyphenols, as a potential dietary tool to help support and maybe even bolster our body's natural defenses against this kind of chemical stress.
It's really quite something to think that a simple food like organic honey could have these effects right down at the level of our DNA.
It truly is. It underscores the idea that compounds in our food, especially from, thoughtfully produced organic sources, can have profound biological activity and potentially help us navigate environmental challenges.
Absolutely. And it definitely leaves you thinking, considering how widespread pesticide use is, what other natural compounds out there might hold similar protective secrets for our health?
That's the big question, isn't it? Where else should researchers be looking? What other interactions between diet and environmental exposures are waiting to be discovered?
It certainly gives you food for thought, quite literally. We definitely encourage listeners interested in this to explore the original research and think about what these findings might mean for their own health and food choices.